and she's going to be talking about legal hot topics in the time of COVID-19. The topics in this presentation are going to include housing, unemployment, and child custody. During the presentation, you will be able to ask general questions via the Zoom Q&A function. You should see Q&A at the bottom of your screen. You may have to hover your mouse or your arrow over the bottom of your screen so the black bar pops up and there will be a Q&A button. Please keep these questions general. Do not divulge any personal information because this session's being recorded and it's being shared live on YouTube and will also be posted on our Calvert Library YouTube page for 30 days. The questions that you ask in Q&A are going to be answered by Megan McDermott and Lee Heitoff, who are also attorneys with Maryland Legal Aid. If you need more individualized legal help, there will be a link to a form and there will also be a phone number provided that you can use to begin the intake process that will enable you to meet one-on-one with an attorney from Maryland Legal Aid via a pre-scheduled virtual meeting. Those meetings will take place on May 27th. So you'll have plenty of time to go through the short intake process to make sure that their attorneys will be able to help you with your legal needs. I just want to thank Charlotte Ahern, Lee Heitoff, and Megan McDermott from Maryland Legal Aid for making the time to share this valuable information with the Calvert Library community. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Charlotte to get things started.
Thank you, Michaela. I want to thank the Calvert County Library for putting all of this together. You guys are truly a beacon for the community, so we really appreciate that. And thanks to all the participants and for everyone that has signed on today. I hope that I can answer your general questions. I know there are a lot of different things taking place right now legally during COVID. So I hope that this at least provides a little bit of insight as to how you can respond to your legal issues. I want to introduce myself as well. My name is Charlotte Ahern. I am a staff attorney with Maryland Legal Aid. One second. Oh, there we go. I work specifically in the Community Lawyering Initiative. Typically, we are a statewide initiative that travels to various libraries and houses of worship and other community and rec centers to provide on-site free legal representation and free consults. Obviously, during this time, we are unable to do that, just as all of the participants, I'm sure, are unable to complete their daily jobs or daily functions. So we've had to pivot a little bit as to our initial platform, how we present legal information and how we give legal representation. So the Calvert County Library has set up this Know Your Rights presentation during the time of COVID. I will try to get through as much information as I can as possible. I will be giving you a ton of information, so I understand if things get bogged down a little bit. As they explained, you can put your Q&A or your questions that will be answered in the Q&A section, and hopefully all of your questions will be answered today. If you have something more specific in the chat box, there is a link to sign up for a free consult with Maryland Legal Aid for a free consult. So very quickly, just a disclaimer that this information is as current as May 15th, 2020. Local rules and laws change regularly, particularly during this time. I would say the best practice, if you have a question about a court procedure or whether a court office is open, you should definitely call the clerk's office in your jurisdiction. They are still fielding questions and answering questions daily, Monday through Friday, of course. If you have a specific legal question or have a legal issue, you can contact Maryland Legal Aid. For basic information related to COVID, these are two websites right here that you can visit for general information. I'm not sure if you can click on the link during the presentation, but it's governor.maryland.gov/coronavirus. And for all of the different executive orders that have been signed by Hogan, you can visit governor.maryland.gov/category/executive orders. Okay, so an outline of the presentation, just a reminder that this is the basics. And if you do have specific questions or detailed questions about your specific situation, you should definitely contact an attorney. Okay, so we're going to start off in a rather boring fashion, so please bear with me. The court operations and procedures. Then we're going to move on to emergency sick leave and unemployment. Then we are going to move on to family law, which there's not many changes there, unfortunately. Then we will move on to property law and consumer law. And lastly, we will talk about the Safer at Home order that was just put into place last week, and the HEROES Act, which was passed by the United States House of Representatives earlier this week. Okay, so court operations and procedure. Most hearings are canceled through June 5th. A judge has the discretion at this point whether your specific legal issue is declared an emergency, or whether your hearing or specific legal issue can be held by video conference, whether it needs to be rescheduled, and things of that nature. However, there are specific hearings that have been deemed emergencies. For example, all domestic violence hearings and peace order hearings have been deemed emergencies. So those are things that you can still file, and I'll explain how you file those particular those particular requests for those particular hearings later on. Other emergency hearings that are taking place relate to child custody, child access, visitation, visitation and support, shelter care or adjudication hearings, SINA hearings, which is children in need of assistance, emergency delinquency hearings, emergency guardianship matters, temporary restraining orders, emergency habeas corpus petitions, which are related to criminal law, and then the rest of these are related to criminal law, competency matters, incarcerated defendants, bail reviews, bench warrants, satisfying bench warrants, body attachments, initial appearances, applications for statement of charges, and acceptance of bail bonds. So the courts have anticipated several dates to reopen, which have needed to be adjusted. So as a result of that, many interim and temporary hearings for related to domestic violence, the hearings have passed. So as a result of that, to minimize any confusion that anyone may have, all of the interim and temporary protective orders and peace orders remain in effect until the court either reopens or has sent notice that you have a particular hearing date for that temporary or final protective order. This really comes into play for individuals that have filed protective orders prior to the quarantine starting. So if you filed a protective order in the beginning of March or sometime in February, and you have not had a final protective order hearing, that interim protective order is still in place. So if an individual violates that protective order, I suggest that you call the police because they are in violation of the protective order if they try to contact you or come near you. Now, all new protective and peace orders are being handled by district court commissioners. So if you are in fear of your safety from a particular individual, I suggest that you either call the police, but we completely understand if you do not feel comfortable calling the police. But if you would like protection, you should contact your local district court commissioner. This is the website here. If you just go to the mdcourts.gov website, there's actually a search bar that you can search for the different commissioners in the various counties. So all new interim orders will have corresponding temporary hearings scheduled for June 8th or June 9th, unless otherwise ordered. So we have yet to get information from the court as to whether they will be open for the month of June. They're supposed to open on June 5th. We are not sure if that is still going to take place. So I would think hopefully in the next week or so, we'll get some more information as to whether the court opens on June 5th. But as of right now, if you have a temporary protective order or peace order, there is supposed to be a hearing scheduled on June 8th or June 9th, so long as the court's open on June 5th. If you have any questions, definitely call your local clerk's office or contact the district court commissioner. Okay. So one more court operation slide. I'm sorry, this is the boring part of the presentation. Or two more slides, excuse me. So what if you want to file a case or you need to respond to a case filed against you? There are certain counties that are e-file counties, meaning electronic filing, and that is through the MDEC system. The court is still accepting documents through e-filing and through MDEC, but there are certain pleadings that are not required to be e-filed in various counties that do not have e-filing, and some of those counties are accepting pleadings by mail. You'd have to check with that local county, with that local clerk's office. All deadlines for filings and responses have been extended for as many days as the courts are closed. So if an individual filed a case against you, say a complaint for damages for a certain amount of money, and you were supposed to answer that on April 1st, you did not need to answer that on April 1st because the deadline has been extended until as many days as the court is closed. If you feel so inclined, definitely contact your local clerk to see if you can still respond or still answer to that via a Dropbox or via a paper pleading, but you are not required to do so. Like I said, best practice, call the court. The clerks have been extremely helpful during this whole mess that we're living in now. And you can go to www.courts.state.md.us/coronavirus location updates to figure out which counties are accepting paper filings. Okay, so luckily in Calvert County, they've been very specific about what they're accepting and what they're not accepting. Calvert County has really been on top of its game in terms of information related to the court operations. So the clerk's office is accepting phone calls from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. They suggest that if you do have capability for e-filing, that you should file it through MDEC. They're continuing to send pleadings and land record documents. Case pleadings, requests for copies, land documents, and other requests are being accepted by mail at the following address for the circuit court, which is 175 Main Street, Prince Frederick, Maryland, 20678. And they are temporarily accepting deeds, other land documents, and there is a drop box at the back of the courthouse. They have instructed that you please place all your documents in a secure envelope, and outside the envelope, just put as much information as possible. The type of instrument, for example, a deed of trust, motion, answer, whatever type of document it is, with your name and as much contact information as possible. They are not accepting applications for marriage licenses. So I apologize to anyone that had a wedding plan that had to cancel it during this horrible pandemic, or if you are planning on getting married, unfortunately, they're not accepting applications for marriage licenses or performing ceremonies or administering oaths for notaries and things of that nature. Again, for more information, you can go to www.courts.state.md.us/clerks/Calvert. Okay, now we got through the court procedures. Here we get on to, I'll start to talk about the more substantive issues. So emergency paid sick leave, which is under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. Can I get emergency sick leave? Can you get emergency sick leave? Here are the situations where you can get emergency sick leave. If you work full-time or part-time, if you work for a government or public employer of any size, if you work for a private employer with less than 500 employees, if you work for a healthcare or emergency responder, they might have gotten an exemption from the federal government. You have to contact your employer specifically to inquire about that. Also, you have to contact your employer specifically if you work for a business of 50 people or fewer. There are exceptions for those types of businesses that you might get an exception depending on whether you have to care for a child or care for an individual that is sick. So employees who have been employed for at least 30 days prior to their leave may be eligible for an additional 10 weeks. And all of these are related to COVID-related reasons, which are on the next slide. So it has to be for COVID-specific related reasons. And I know everyone's thinking everyone's affected by COVID right now, but these are the reasons that they have been enumerated. So number one, you are subject to a government quarantine or isolation related to COVID-19. You've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to COVID-19. You're experiencing symptoms and you are seeking a medical diagnosis. You need to care for an individual who is subject to an order, you know, a significant other or a sibling. And also you need to care for a son or daughter because of their school, which most individuals that have children in the school have been suspended at this point, but it's due to COVID-19. Or you're experiencing any other substantially similar condition. This one is a little vague, which I haven't seen much of that, but the other 5 have been very prevalent. Okay, so how much will you receive if you want to get emergency sick leave? So full-time, which is about 2 weeks up to 80 hours, or part-time, you'll get the average number of hours you worked in a week based off of a 2-week period. So it takes the average of those 2 weeks. You're going to get 100% of your pay for qualifying reasons 1 through 3, which is up to $511 daily, a little over $5,000 total. You will receive 2/3 of your usual pay if for qualifying reasons number 4 and number 6, up to $200 daily and up to $2,000 total. So you can get up to 12 weeks of paid sick leave and expanded family medical leave at 2/3 for qualifying reason number 5, which is up to $2,000 daily and $2,000 total. Also, just a reminder, which I don't think I put on here yet, here we go, is that this law ends on December 31st, 2020. So even if everything completely opens back up in July, but you qualify for any of the reasons on this slide, you can still get that emergency sick leave, let's say in September, even though everything is completely opened up at that point, because this ends in December of 2020. If you think that an employer is not complying with any of these, with the requirements for the emergency sick leave, definitely contact the Department of Labor. This is the phone numbers and the website. Also, I didn't include on the slides that you do not have to use your sick leave that you already have accrued with your employer prior to using the emergency sick leave. So if your employer tries to say, oh, well, you need to use your regular sick leave first before you use your emergency sick leave, that is not the case. You can use your emergency sick leave before you use any other sick leave that you have accrued with your employer. Okay, unemployment insurance. Many people unfortunately are unemployed right now. So I hope that this answers any questions that you might have. This is under the CARES Act. So can you file for unemployment? These are the different situations where you can file for unemployment. If you work full-time or part-time, you've lost your job through no fault of your own, you've been laid off or have a reduction of hours tied to COVID-19. And the CARES Act has specifically allowed for individuals that typically might not qualify for traditional UI, like contractors, gig workers, or people who've had to leave their job to avoid virus exposure or to care for an infected family member. That might apply. Typically, doctor and government issue notices are required. So people who are not eligible for traditional UI might be eligible for the different types of pandemic unemployment insurance under this CARES Act. If you have specific questions, you should definitely contact legal aid. I already have a few clients that I've been trying to help navigate the unemployment nightmare that is going on. But I will say that Maryland, the website is much better than it initially was. So I'll explain the different types of pandemic unemployment insurance, but at least as far as the website goes, they first will see if you qualify for traditional UI, and then they will see if you qualify for these other types of unemployment. So PUA, this is UI benefits for individuals that don't qualify for traditional UI. For example, if you're self-employed, you're an independent contractor, you don't have sufficient work history, or if your employer has cut back your hours due to COVID. Again, your unemployment must be as a result of COVID, and you can get up to 39 weeks of benefits, and the minimum benefit is 190 per week. It is available retroactively. So say you just lost your job today, or I'm sorry, say you lost your job 2 months ago, or almost 2 months ago at this point, and it was due to a COVID related issue, but you haven't applied yet. You can go on today and apply and retroactively request the money from the beginning of the time that you were unemployed. And again, this ends in December. So if everything opens back up and something happens in September or October or November, you can still try to get this type of unemployment at that time. So PUA claimants are also eligible for PUC, which I explained on the next slide. And employees receiving paid leave are not eligible. That is like a stipend or some other situation. But if you have a situation like that, definitely contact Maryland Legal Aid. Unfortunately, undocumented workers do not qualify. If you are a documented immigrant under DACA or TPS, you definitely qualify, and you should try to apply for that. So PUC is unemployment compensation, which adds an additional $600 per week to the claimant's regular UI benefit. And it's not considered income for Medicaid or for CHIP, and it expires at the end of July. PEUC is an additional 13 weeks of UI benefits after all of the other UI benefits have been exhausted. And claimants do have to actively seek work, but states are flexible, which I believe in the state of Maryland, they're not requiring that you actively seek work. The states cannot decrease your UI benefits, and states must waive the 1 week waiting period, which that in Maryland, you do not have to have that 1 week waiting period. Okay, so how do you file? This is all great. Those are great benefits, but how do you actually get the money? This Beacon portal is much better than the original website that they were using when it crashed many, many times. So if you go to this website, it's very easy to navigate, and you can apply for unemployment at beacon.labor.maryland.gov/beacon/claimant page HTML. What I've seen and what we have been told is that it's about 20 to 30 days before you receive any payments, because they're completely overloaded with requests at this time. Again, best practice is to always call, but it's going to be very difficult to get through at this point. So if you want phone information, if you want to try to call, that is the website that should have the specific information as to the phone number. There's also, this website also has the documents that you need. If it's related to COVID, you have other documents that you also need to get. An example of that would be a letter from your employer stating that you were going to start a job, but you can't due to COVID. Correspondence from your employer stating that COVID is the reason that the business is closed. Correspondence from your child's school or child care facility that COVID caused the child care facility or school to close, or documentation from a doctor or medical personnel showing that someone in your household was diagnosed with COVID and that you were taking care of them. Okay, so this is a flow chart, which it might be difficult to see. It's basically goes over all the information that I just shared with you. I can also give this to the Calvert County Library. But if you do have specific questions, definitely contact Maryland Legal Aid and we can assist you with that or attempt to assist you. Family law. I know many people have a lot of different questions about childcare and child custody at this time, but unfortunately, there's really not that many changes to family law due to COVID. All court orders still apply related to custody and visitation. So you still have to drop off your child to your child's mother or father or grandparent in compliance with what the order says. If you do have a order that permits that both parties can agree amicably about a change, then that can be adjusted. But that is only if the order permits that. If parents can't agree, then you have to comply with the order. Unfortunately, it's just, you just have to use common sense in this situation. For child support, unfortunately, there is no change, no exception. You must still pay your child support. I know that's very difficult for people, particularly when so many people are unemployed, but they have not carved out any exceptions for that. And you can attempt to file a modification, but the likelihood of that being deemed an emergency is very low. So unfortunately, child support, there's not many changes there. Scheduling orders for family law cases, you can certainly contact the court to try to change those orders or submit a motion, and the court will consider your request. However, like I mentioned before, the deadlines for everything are pushed back until the court reopens. But if you feel so inclined, you can certainly try to file a motion to change your scheduling order. However, I doubt that the court would deem that an emergency. Okay, I hope everyone is still with me. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you, and I hope your questions are being answered. And if not, they're not being answered yet, we'll definitely answer them by the end. Property, we're going to start with landlord tenant. Pay your rent as much as you can. I know that is difficult, but rent is still due and owing. Also, please remember that you can only be evicted by a court order. That goes for everything all the time, absent COVID. You can only be evicted by a court order. So if someone shows up at your house without a court order asking, trying to kick you out, call the police. If you do have a significant reduction of income, it's best practice to let your landlord know, or let the housing authority know if you live in a HUD-owned building. Evictions are stayed for the state of Maryland. So if someone does try to come to your house and evict you at this time, that is not legal. They are stayed for the state of Maryland, and then this website actually has the stay of evictions specifically for Calvert County, which if you can't click on this, you can Google search, stay of evictions Calvert County order, and it should be the first or second link. For HUD-owned buildings, evictions are forbidden from March 27th until June 25th, until further notice at this point. Landlord tenant continued. Okay, so non-emergency actions are stayed. This evictions and failure to pay rent, breach of lease, tenant holding over, rent escrow, those were not included in that list at the very beginning of the presentation of types of pleadings and proceedings that are considered emergencies. They can certainly try to file a failure to pay rent, but nothing is going to happen. Nothing is going to move forward. Court proceedings are to be scheduled after June 5th, absent any information that we receive in the coming weeks from the court about when they will reopen. So there is eviction relief that's in place by Governor Hogan, until the state of emergency is over. This comes into play if courts start hearing eviction cases soon. It requires documentation of substantial loss of income, and you cannot be evicted for contracting COVID-19. If you need help, and if anyone is threatening to evict you, definitely first and foremost call the police. You can also try to contact your district court commissioner, and definitely contact Maryland Legal Aid, because that should not be happening at all. Okay, this is a duplicate of the same flow chart. It's about evictions and whether you can be evicted. As you can see, the end of each of these different paths is a no. So if someone is threatening to evict you, that is illegal at this time. Okay, utilities. There's other things related to property, not just landlord-tenant law. Utilities, no gas, electric, telephone, water, cable, internet provider. They cannot terminate your service until the emergency is over. Okay, so they cannot do it right now. If they say, I'm going to terminate your service, they cannot do that. They cannot charge you any late fees through June 1st until further notice. The best practice, similar to rent, is to pay what you can. I understand that that's very difficult during this time, but you can also try to contact the different providers about various payment plans. You can also apply for energy assistance. So a copy of that executive order is at this website, the ndcourts.gov website. If you have some type of utility that's trying to say that we're trying to shut off your service. Foreclosure, similar to landlord-tenant, all of these pleadings are not deemed emergencies, so they are stayed until further notice. They're not moving forward unless the parties can show that a delay of a residential foreclosure will place an undue burden on the defendant. I have yet to see this. I don't know if any of my colleagues have seen this yet, but I have not heard of any foreclosures that have been moving forward because of an undue burden. A copy of this executive order can also be found at ndcourts.gov as well. Okay, mortgages. I hope everyone's still with me. I know I'm, again, spewing a lot of information right now. Okay, so for mortgages, what if you can't make your mortgage payment? A forbearance, you may qualify for a forbearance plan. So forbearance is available to certain individuals absent COVID, but right now they've expanded the individuals that qualify for forbearance. So a forbearance is when a mortgage company suspends your payments for a certain period of time. But you have to remember that after that period of time expires, you are still required to make up the payments that you did not make for that 6-month period, let's say, for example. You can either pay it immediately after the 6 months is over, or at a later date via a lump sum, loan modification, or multiple payments throughout the course of the loan. Do you qualify? Okay, you might be eligible for this plan if you had a reduction of income due to COVID-19. And this also is for single family residential rental property. So if you're a landlord and you cannot make your mortgage payment because your tenant cannot pay you because they're unemployed, you can also qualify for this, but this is only federally backed loans, okay? This is only for federally backed loans. The two biggest ones are Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. There is a list here of some other, VA loans and things of that nature. But the two biggest ones are Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, okay? Which apparently, which this makes sense that half of the mortgages in the United States are owned by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. If you do not know who owns your loan, there is a lookup tool with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that you can look up to see if they own those loans. A lot of people don't know who owns their loans because they have a loan servicer. Like, say if you have a loan servicer like Ocwen, for example, that is not the company that actually owns your loan. Mortgage owners tend to get third parties to service the loans for them and kind of do their dirty work with collecting the money and foreclosing upon people. You can ask your servicer who owns the loan, or you can use these different tools. So what if you have a mortgage that is not federally backed? This doesn't apply, unfortunately, but definitely still contact the owner of that loan. Because a lot of credit unions and different mortgage lenders are providing flexibility in different kind of repayment plans at this time. So you can visit this website, which if you just Google search the Department of Labor's press release on the different initiatives and help with this, you should be able to find information as to who owns your loan and what private loan owners are providing different programs for people during this time. Okay, consumer law. There isn't that much on this slide because this is just a smaller slide only related to bankruptcy and student loans, but bankruptcies are still happening. Can you file for bankruptcies? Yes, filings are still being accepted. which that does not surprise me, given that a lot of people are getting into debt during this time. So all non-emergency bankruptcy pleadings that were supposed to take place in between March 16th and April 24th are now extended by 42 days, unless the presiding judge in an individual case sets a different date. But you can still file if you haven't been, filed. So if you have student loans, what about your student loans? Borrowers with federally held student loans, they've set the interest rate at 0% for 60 days, and they're not collecting, they're suspending payments if you have not defaulted. So different collection actions and wage garnishments are also suspended for 60 days if you were in default prior to all of this happening. I believe that most federally held student loans, the account number or loan number begins with an E, but you should go on your different portals that you have to pay your student loans and see what type of loan you have. Borrowers who are already in default should contact the Department of Labor. That is the phone number right there, 877-825-9923. And private student loans, unfortunately, don't qualify for this program. Excuse me. Okay, so the Safer at Home order, this just happened last week. Governor Hogan announced this. One second. Oh, there we go. So as of May 13th, Governor Hogan amended the stay-at-home order. It is now the Safer at Home order. It allows for certain businesses and facilities to reopen, certain retail, parks, religious buildings, organizations. So this website has a copy of that executive order. And you should be able to Google search this to figure out what types of facilities are open. Remember, though, that even if a facility is open, you must wear a cloth mask or face covering, and that was effective on April 18th. So Calvert County is in stage 1 of this Maryland Strong roadmap to recovery plan that Hogan has announced. It's transferring from the stay-at-home order to the safer-at-home order. I believe Calvert County did extend the state of emergency for 30 days. Don't quote me on that, but I did see something along those lines. But that's just for the state of emergency for Calvert County. Calvert County is still, I believe, complying with stage 1 of this Maryland Strong plan. So if you have any questions about which businesses are open, you can visit these websites. There's also an email address there and a phone number to contact the Department of Economic Development. Or if you own a business, you should be able to contact them to see what you have to do to begin reopening that business. Okay, the HEROES Act. This actually passed earlier this week. It went through it passed in the House of Representatives, so it still has to go through the Senate. It is essentially just another stimulus package, which is great. And I know that many people could use everything that is included in this act, which it's going to extend unemployment. It's going to have increased food support, rent, energy assistance, broadband service for people trying to, use the internet. It's expanding debt forbearance for most mortgages and student loans and rent. It's stopping actions by debt collectors. It's all, from what I have read, at least, it seems pretty good. It's just, again, another stimulus package, which I know the first one helped people out a lot. So hopefully this passes in the Senate, and that we'll get more information as to how this is going to be implemented. So I know that was so much information. Again, I want to thank Calvert County Library. I again, just threw so much information at all the participants, but I hope that answered at least some of the basic questions that you have. If you have more in-depth questions, 100% contact Maryland Legal Aid. This is our phone number here. And then we also have a virtual community lawyering email address if you prefer the email. I believe that in the chat box, someone did copy and paste the link to our basic intake form so that you can set up a free consultation with an attorney. It's very simple and easy. I think it's about only 5 or 6 questions. And if you have more specific questions, definitely click on that link so you can set up a consult with a free attorney. So if anyone has any questions, I know people have been asking questions throughout the presentation. If anyone has any feedback or if there are specific topics that you want to hear about in the future, let us know. But I'm not sure if there's questions that still need answering.
Hi, Charlotte.
Hi.
We have had a couple of questions, and maybe you could just specify regarding evictions and rent. So you mentioned that no one can be evicted right now. Can you explain what will happen when the courts reopen?
So unfortunately, we are still in a position where we're trying to figure that out ourselves. So if somebody has a failure to pay rent action, once the courts reopen, you're still going to have all of the same protections that you would have initially, which is you'd have, a hearing, and various, depending on what type of action it is, you could answer and try to negotiate with your landlord. But at this point, we're in the same boat as you, in the sense that we're trying to figure out what's going to happen once the courts reopen. I know there are certain protections that are being put in place now so that we don't see all of these mass evictions, but there's nothing concrete yet. If that does take place, that's another situation that you should definitely contact Maryland Legal Aid, because we would be, we want to help individuals in that situation. But as far as not paying your rent goes, we are foreseeing that there are going to be people in unfortunate situations after this is completed, which is why we're telling people to contact Maryland Legal Aid, because we don't think that people should be evicted just because they can't pay their rent during this time. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
I think so. I think people were curious from a landlord point of view. And just to be clear, we at Legal Aid, we only represent tenants in eviction cases, but obviously to do that, we have to know sort of the landlord side of things as well. Mm-hmm. But once the moratorium is over, landlords will have the same types of remedies that they've always had.
Exactly.
Those just aren't available right now because we know so many people are unemployed and unable to pay rent. But once those moratoriums are lifted, landlords would go through the same process they've gone through in the past as far as evicting folks. So
definitely nothing has changed in terms of the process. Oh, I'm sorry. Nothing has changed in terms of the process. It's just going to be starting at a later date.
Thanks, Charlotte. And we've had a couple of questions about the emergency sick leave.
Okay.
And I actually am not sure if we can, I don't know the answer to this. And I'm not sure if you do or if perhaps Lee does. But someone was asking about sick leave versus emergency sick leave. And I explained that not all, some employers have exemptions, so they don't have to do the emergency sick leave. Mm-hmm. So they might encourage their employees to use their regularly accrued sick leave instead. And then someone asked if it is more beneficial to an employer to use accrued sick leave versus the emergency paid sick leave.
Well, it depends. Sorry, I'm going back to this slide. I know it's kind of in the beginning. So these, at least from an employer's perspective, I'm not quite sure. As you stated, we represent individuals. So if either your employer has to figure out whether they qualify for this emergency paid sick leave. If they're a private employer, less than 500 employees, they qualify. I would, I don't know if this is advice, but from a personal perspective, if I was an employer, the emergency paid sick leave sounds like it would be more beneficial for me as an employer, because I'm not paying the sick leave out of my own pocket, I guess. I don't know though. That's not advice. I'm just talking from a personal perspective. But I'd say check with your employer. These are the types of employers that qualify. If it's the government or public employer of any size, or a private employer with less than 500 employees. And then these other two exceptions here, again, are exceptions from the federal government. So you'd have to check with your employer to see if they qualify for those exceptions. I hope that answers the question.
I think it did. Thank you, Charlotte.
Okay.
I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A. I don't know if there's any other questions out there.
The chat box looks like, so it looks like John M. had a question, but I think for John M., you should definitely contact, oh, well, I don't, there's specific information on here, but let me just see real quick. Anyone that has specific information as to their personal life should contact Maryland Legal Aid, I think. Because we would have to do a very quick intake for you, but also we do not want your private information to be displayed publicly. Let me go through this real quick to get to our contact information. And I believe in the chat box, the link to our very brief questionnaire was submitted. I think it's about 5 or 6 questions. And then, or if you don't feel comfortable filling that information out at this time, you can contact this phone number, which is 443-451-2805. And someone should get back to you within a couple, I think 24 to 48 hours to speak to you about whether you qualify for our services and to get a free consult with an attorney. But if that's all for, I guess, the questions, I definitely want to thank Calvert County Library again for setting all this up. I know everyone is kind of drowning at this point. So any information that we can give to the community, we are more than willing to give. So if anyone also has any suggestions for other topics that they want to see covered, we would love to hear that.
I see Michaela's trying to talk, but we're not hearing her.
Oh, you're not hearing me?
There you go. Go again.
You hear me now? Awesome. I want to thank Charlotte and Megan and Lee for helping today, and all of our attendees for coming. I did want to let you know that the playback will be available on the Calvert Library YouTube channel. If you go to it right now, the link will be live, but at some point today, it will come down for processing. And after like an hour or so, it will be back. So if you try to replay via the link and it doesn't work, come back again later and it will be available. And with that, if nobody else has any other questions, if you want to have your one-on-one, please fill out the intake form or contact Maryland Legal Aid via the phone number that you can see on your screen. And appointments will be scheduled for around lunchtime on May 27th.
And I will say that you will be redirected to a library survey, just a generic survey. If you would take that afterwards, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.